This is quite an intriguing topic and has been discussed a lot. Like, should we build this bridge? Should we not? And I think that we have a good group of people here to discuss that. So maybe with your own words, maybe you can start with your first thoughts, like a minute or so about the project. Let's start from Martin.
I'm Martin Lengi from Estonian Road Administration. And first thoughts about Saaremaa Bridge. Of course, we are acting in the public interest, and the public interest regarding the Saaremaa island is to ensure the connection, the mobility between the mainland and the island. Now, question of the service level comes next, and this is question about affordability, feasibility, and also about the preference of the local people living in the Saaremaa island. So now if I'm considering the project is quite costly. If we are thinking about the prices, let's say current 2019 prices approximately, there are three main options there. There is this northern bridge, southern bridge, and the tunnel. So the prices of the projects are approximately so that one of the bridges is about 300 million. Another option at the moment at the current prices would be about 400 million, and the tunnel would be a little bit more than 400 million euros. And now if I consider this budget which the government has for the road infrastructure currently, which is about 250 million per year, and from this budget, about 40 to 50 million is for the new projects. To these projects where we are changing, improving the infrastructure significantly, not just replacing it, but for example, we have a 1+1 road and we are building 2+1 or 2+2 options, and also the bridges. We have for that about 40 to 50 million. So this means that the volume of just this one project would be quite significant. It would consume from the state budget approximately for 10 years development funds. So this is one of the main considerations, or one important consideration there. And the second question maybe is about the feasibility. We had cost-benefit studies. Those were refreshed last year with the help of consultants from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and those four options were with cost-benefit ratios starting with the tunnel from 1.7 benefit cost ratio, and for a southern bridge it was 3. But there are some other concerns as well. The northern bridge was about 2.3 cost-benefit ratio. But there are also environmental concerns because this area is a Natura area. The Suure Väina meri is Natura area. So this means that maybe the cheapest options regarding the bridge is not available there. And the third main consideration is the opinion and preference of the people. So we have had 2 studies conducted by the road administration in 2010 and 2012, and the support for the bridge was, in the first study it was 54% from the people, and in the second study it was a little bit more than 60%. However, the bridge wasn't, the tunnel wasn't so popular. The support for the tunnel was about 30% of the people. So those are some considerations regarding the bridge.
Okay, good. Margus, you have had experience with kind of working these kind of big projects. One was the latest forest and then Estonian Cell. So how do you see that bridge, or what are the things stopping that?
Yes, my experience is not connected with big infrastructure projects, but big industrial projects. And one thing what was also mentioned by you is that while planning or executing something big, you should have the support of the local people. And the question is that what the local people will gain from the bridge. And there is always opposition. There is always some people who are against whatever arguments you bring. So the local municipality or the involved authorities, they should kind of have an upper hand for this, and they need to be able to provide something extra for the local people. And I think it cannot be much more than to kind of special development of these areas involved. And for this purpose, either some kind of part of tax revenue should be transmitted to the local communities, or another way is that the developer should be able to support the local well-being with some other means. And in today's legal framework, it's not allowed. It's illegal. So I think government should build some kind of mechanism to help to support these local communities with these big infrastructure projects.
Okay, good, thank you. So Vilnius, how do you see that? Maybe looking from abroad?
Yes, I come from Finland, Nordic Investment Bank. Myself, I'm Lithuanian. So I don't know much about that project. What I know that Estonia is discussing that project for quite many years, and the decisions are not taken on that project yet. So it seems to be quite complicated decision to take. And of course, the project is not small for Estonia as such, but not huge in a way. So of course, it's it could be done potentially as a PPP project. But of course, there should be political will, political decisions on the national level, on the local level as well, and decisions on the project, how it should be done in a way. So.
Okay, thank you. And Christian, another view from the kind of investor side, from Swedbank funds. Surely at one point the funds could be investors as well, or how do you see that?
Yeah, hello, thanks. I represent the Swedbank pension funds, the biggest pension fund manager in Estonia, at least for the time being. And maybe I start a bit from the general level, that there are many ways how pension funds can invest and can finance the infrastructure projects. So to simplify a bit, on one side, it's a debt financing, project financing, which actually I see increasing demand in Europe. A lot of old EU member states, pension funds, they are getting more and more involved into infrastructure project financing on the debt level. And then on the other end, there is a direct debt equity financing where pension funds or investors, whoever is the investor, also take the direct equity risk. And now to go into more details, then there are different sort of levels where you can enter the project, or different time frames. You can enter the project from the scratch, from the beginning, to take all the development risk, to take all the construction risk, or you can enter somewhere in the midway. Once, for example, the project is already developed, it is ready, it is already operating, and then you are making kind of a buyout for the developer or a constructor. And obviously, sort of the risk-return trade-offs of those different financing vehicles and different timings when you enter the project, these are very different. Now, when it comes more directly to the Saaremaa Bridge, then as little as I have understood about it, I can talk, is that I think from the global perspective, it's not a major infrastructure object or major infrastructure deal. But it surely is, I think one can call it as a landmark project from the local perspective. That such a big infrastructure object hasn't been built in Estonia perhaps in the past, and most likely it will be the biggest single infrastructure object to be built also in the next few decades. And now when I'm looking at the experience of different landmark projects in different countries, then not always, but quite often, there are two characteristics which tend to which those landmark projects tend to have. One is that their construction tends to go over time, over initial planned time period. And then second is that they tend to go over budget. That initial budget calculations tend to be overly conservative.
So both great things for investor, right?
Yeah, absolutely, fantastic things. And then now when I'm trying to combine those two parts, those financing possibilities and those characteristics of landmark projects, then sort of currently my gut feeling is that perhaps it requires at least a few different investor groups or investor types for this project to be financed and for this project to become alive. For example, from the pension fund perspective, it is currently hard for me to see that there would be an appetite to take the construction risk as an equity investor. Probably from the pension fund perspective, it would become more interesting once the bridge is already finished, it is operating, and then to make some sort of a buyout for the one who constructed it, who built it. So I think that it isn't the financing of such project once the pension funds will be part of it and other private investors can be actually quite complicated. That in different time of the project it requires also different investor types to be present.
Okay, so in a way, I think that's also like where general perception is quite often wrong. They say that let's find an investor, but it's not about finding an investor, but maybe multiple investors, because maybe that's oversimplification, but it's similar to the real estate development. Some investors never want to go to the development phase, and some active ones really don't want to touch the long-term investing afterwards, right?
Absolutely.
So in a way, what makes the structure of a PPP very complicated is like you have to find different type of investors, probably, and the other P there, the public, needs to be managed on the kind of state government and local municipality level, what Margus also said, right? So the number of players and their wishes is probably the reason why this hasn't happened yet. Or what do you think, Ol? Or is something else stopping?
No, for me, it's I can only talk from the financing potential financing perspective, and I think quite a lot of risks were touched upon, which are hard to measure from the so-called classical risk measurement techniques, what we are used to in assessing the different business projects. This sort of buy-in from local community, potential negative adverse effects from local community, etc. These are extremely difficult to put into numbers, and I think for that kind of projects, the more there are those unknowns, what's known unknowns, known unknowns, the more it will actually impact the pricing of financing. So if I have any suggestion then sort of my suggestion for, I don't know, for government, politicians, whoever, is that the more they can reduce those known unknowns, perhaps the easier and the cheaper it will be to execute that kind of a project.
And Vilnius, you know this world as well, right? So how do you see that financing part? Like, what are the main blockers there?
Yeah, from a financiers' point of view, well, Nordic Investment Bank is active in that region, in Nordic and Baltic region. We don't have as many PPP projects as CIB, for instance, has. As in this region, PPPs are not very popular in a way, because some countries are heavily objecting to have PPPs, and some countries are willing to do. So we financed projects in Norway, for instance, Finland, and Sweden, but not very many, as those projects are complicated. And I mean, from there are a few, how to say, points to kind of evaluate that. Estonia, by starting those projects, it has no experience in PPP projects and structuring of PPP projects, and lack of experience is quite often actually a big problem in those projects. So the advice would be that Estonia or public sector should engage international advisors actually, and ask them to help to structure projects. On other aspects, we very much concentrate on environmental matters of environmental side of the project, and we do that for a very long time actually. So on that side, we would, before we make a decision whether to finance a project or not, we would do a detailed environmental analysis of the project. So that's also kind of a responsibility of the public sector to well prepare those environmental impact assessments, for instance. Another question is what kind of PPP it would be, whether it would be availability-based or with market risk, whether it would be a toll bridge, for instance, and there would be a payment to cross the bridge. So that also needs to be evaluated, and is the risk of actually not enough cash flows if there is a payment, and then you have a reduction in traffic, for instance, over the bridge. So there can be a mix, I guess, of toll payments and state subsidies, but it has to be kind of evaluated. So.
Okay, thank you. And Margus, with the last forest project, you also saw that you had investors willing to participate, right, for the whole project. You had government level support, and then going forward, at some point, the local Tartu municipality was so strongly against it that you couldn't do it there. So that was so, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So looking at that, like, and maybe looking forward, what could be the ways, what you mentioned, how should one try to involve the local municipality better, or should that be kind of pushed from the government level, or what could be the ways to make that happen?
Maybe I will a little bit repeat what I told before, that today in Estonia, the local municipalities mostly have to take care of this kind of spending part of the budget. So they have to provide whatever services, but they don't have to think where the money comes from. It comes from the budget, and they only the task is to spend it as well as they can it. And if Estonian government decides to change actually that what kind of gains local communities are getting from big either infrastructure or industrial investments, and if the local municipalities are made are made interested to attract this kind of investment, I think the table will turn around, and both local people and local municipalities will start to look differently to the new developments.
For example, if some of the revenue that comes, if let's imagine there is a bridge fee, like in Norway, if some of the revenue would go to the local governments or local municipalities on both sides of the bridge, that could be a way to do it, right? Maybe.
This is one way. I think there is more than one way how to solve it. But I believe very strongly that we are facing a problem in Estonia, and we need to find a solution for this, because this is something what really limits the ability to make big investments into local municipalities.
Yeah, I do agree. So with that, I have a question to Martin, maybe firstly you, but to everybody else as well. I looked at the numbers, and there was a PricewaterhouseCoopers research that showed that we are kind of subsidizing the ferry transport with over 10 million euros per year. And the Southern Bridge as a project, the cost there would be initially around 12 million. So I think that those numbers are very close. So we are not talking about huge additional money that needs to be put in every year, but it's pretty much the same ballpark. So I think that generally public perception is about that this is going to be super expensive, but are the numbers like realistic, or is it really that close?
Regarding this study, the study was made based on the assumptions that crossing from the mainland to the island, the fees or the price for the traveler shouldn't change too much. So this was one of the assumptions. So this means that the government subsidy would need to continue approximately at the same level with the bridge as well. So we are talking about a toll road essentially, and where one part of the toll is paid by the traveler, and one part is a government subsidy there. So this means that these subsidies would be quite close in that sense. So what is the difference? The difference is in that business case that after 20 years of operation, there would be a bridge, but still this bridge, the life expectancy of a bridge is about 100 years or so. So basically, after this operational period of 20 years, which was business case in this study, the government would need to refinance it or purchase the bridge from this PPP partner. So this would be a quite significant obligation. And of course, for the state, there is a risk involved, because the expectancy is that it would last for 100 years. So how it is constructed in the first place. So there are some risks in there for the state in that sense.
Okay, so in a way, like putting that all together, we discussed like how complex the setup of a PPP is, like to have like on the private side different type of parties aligned, and on the government side as well. So it surely is complex, but if the numbers if numbers start to make sense, then it can happen. So my question would be that, let's say there is a new or like existing prime minister who says like this needs to be done and starts pushing towards that really strongly, then this would happen, right? Is there anything that's blocking it?
There are some things that need to be overcome. There are some legislative changes which need to be done, because currently only a Ministry of Finance can take long-term financial obligations for the state. So, for example, road administration cannot do that. And there are some other changes as well which need to be done in the state procurement law. So approximately it would be, I think, like a 3-year process. If I think what needs to happen next is we don't have currently experience with the PPP projects, so we need to get this experience and the competencies and actually find the partner and start the project. So it would be, I think, approximately 2 years, and now from there there needs to be a special planning for this project, and this is on Natura area, and there are some risks involved with that. But basically, there needs to be strategic impact analysis, and when this process is completed, it could take 3 years, maybe more, even. And the next phase would be then actually design of the bridge and the building permits. So it would be like.
Yeah, but if there is this will to do it, then there is not like really nothing big stopping it.
It can be done, of course, yes.
So that's
but
good.
But there are some obstacles that need to be overcome.
Yeah, and surely from the governmental level as well. But Vilnius as well, you've seen different type of deals, and I think that was what was discussed before, was that the visibility of revenues, like, or what the investor is looking for is to have some kind of visibility in terms of revenues. The better, the kind of lower can be the interest rate or the risk. But still, I think that currently, is it a problem that there is no track record, right? So we don't have, like Lithuania has a bit more, Latvia a bit as well, but not much in Estonia. So if like a PPP investor like doesn't see the track record, so is that the problem that we haven't done any?
Well, you have to start somewhere, I guess. Yeah, for our bank, or I guess for EIB, it's not a problem in principle that there's no track record as such of PPP projects. But as I said, you have to consider very much actually how to gain that experience from maybe other countries in a way which have done lots of PPPs and engaging proper advisors while making decisions. Because yes, in some years back in Baltics we tried to do some PPP projects actually, but some of them just failed because of lack of experience and because of political support. So we, as an IFIs, we try to help public sector, but sometimes public sector tries to invent a wheel in a way, and they don't take the experiences from other countries of PPP projects. So again, engaging advisors in a way. We can help to some extent to structure the deals, but you have to start somewhere, so it's doable.
Yeah, and if the additional deals would happen, or the first ones, then everything else comes easier. Like.
Yes, I mean, if you do one road PPP, then another road PPP is probably much easier, because then the public sector and other stakeholders are much more experienced in that. Yes, definitely, yes.
Like the Latvian example about the roads, we had one example and then 3 additional one popped up. So I think that's how things go. But maybe it's time to take some questions. Can we share it to the screen? I see that there are at least 3. So the first one is that to you, Martin, why would you think Estonian road administration would need to have the ability to enter into long-term obligations?
If we are a leading partner in the PPP projects, then we are taking a long-term commitment for the government, and this is why we need to have the ability, otherwise we can't do it.
Yeah, okay. And other 2 questions are in a bit tied. So first one is like, does Saaremaa Bridge make sense from an environmental point of view? And the other one is, what are the alternative options, like electric ferries on the environmental issue side? So does anybody want to comment on the environmental side?
There are some risks, but at the same time, if we are considering the study which was made by VSB in 2008 to 2011, then in this study actually quite significant research was done regarding the environmental risks and also about the mitigation measures. So at that point of time, those measures were taken into account when assessing the construction prices. And this study has been sort of the basis of this refreshment of the cost-benefit study, which was made last year by PricewaterhouseCoopers. So in that sense, it has been taken into account, of course, some of the studies. I think there was about 16 different studies regarding the environment, and those need to be refreshed. There are some opinions that the best alternative would be the tunnel there when considering the Natura area there. So if we are talking about emissions, then in the cost-benefit analysis, of course it was a consideration, but it didn't have significant impact there, because ferries have the combustion engines, and the cars have the combustion engines as well, which need to cross the bridge or the tunnel. So.
Okay, good, thank you. I think, can we scroll lower? I think there was one question to Christian as well. Yes, as a local pension fund manager, what kind of return target would you have when financing a local long-term infrastructure development? With the precision of 2 percentage points, right?
Good question. It brings me back where I started. It's many different ways how to finance an infrastructure, whether it's debt financing, whether it's equity financing, and then in which stage it is. If we are trying to stay within the topic of this bridge, then I'm just now thinking loudly that imagine a financing for the project which has been already built, which is operating, and where the government takes most of the business risk also in terms of the traffic. That yes, it's a toll road, but if the traffic decreases, then the government tops it up. I mean, how far is it from the government bond? Not very far anymore. So the return expectation for such kind of financing, I think, can really be low single-digit levels. Then the more you start to add the business risk, obviously the higher is also the expected return from the project. But maybe as an example, what I can give to you is, I think it's 2 years ago, three Estonian pension fund managers, they committed 20 million euros to one Baltic infrastructure fund. And the maturity of this fund is 20 years, 2017 plus 20, so 2037. And if I remember correctly, then the performance fee cap, or the hurdle rate from where the performance fee starts from is 7%. So this maybe gives you an understanding what are the return expectations in that kind of universe with also equity risk involved, because that's not a debt financing fund.
Yeah, and looking at the scarily increasing number of negative government bonds, all in all, like this would be an interesting project, right?
I mean, that, as you said, that, and then that's the reason why in so to say old Europe, more and more pension funds get engaged into debt financing of that kind of projects. I guess the reason why the pension funds have some comparative advantage there, for example, in front of the banks, is that the banks not often want to give out 20-year financing. They might give a 20-year financing, but there are some clauses that, let's say, within 5 or 10 years, there's a possibility to look over the financing terms, etc. Plus, perhaps due to those new Basel requirements, it's very capital intensive for them. The pension funds generally don't have this capital intensity issue because the risk is put on the not on the company side but on the client side, on the investor side. So sort of long-term debt investing, which probably is very liquid. The main difference for that one as compared to sort of general government bonds is that it is probably fairly liquid. Who wants to buy a bond for Saaremaa Bridge? Sort of globally, you know. perhaps less than investors for general Lithuanian government bonds. So as a result, there is some sort of a liquidity premium for that one. So these are the terms which sort of determine the expected return and pricing of those projects.
So the answer is 2.7?
2.7, 1 year duration, yes.
Good, we have that cleared. So it's really good to see the questions popping up. We're like a truly interactive world. So one for Vilnius. How appealing the project would be for international financial institutions? If it would be a PPP project, like what would be the risks for you?
Yes, so the project is quite interesting for us because we finance lots of infrastructure projects in the region. So we finance roads, airports, seaports, railways. So there would be an interest definitely in financing the project. And what risks do I see? Well, as in any other, let's say, PPP project, there are usual risks. For instance, is there market risk? Is there not a market risk? Is it availability based or is it a mix of that? So what happens when the traffic goes down and if there is enough cash flows to cover the debt as such? So that's one issue to consider. And as I mentioned, environmental matters, but of course, as we analyze those before we make a decision, so that risk is kind of probably eliminated in the beginning, but you never know what can happen in the future with the project. But in general, yes, it's interesting.
Okay. There is one question for Martin. How would you assess Saaremaa project time-wise if the state expresses the willingness to start planning it? How long would it take it? Like today is the decision, let's go when it's ready.
It could be, like I tried to summarize, it would be this preparation process could be roughly 10 years and the construction about 5 years. So if the decision would be today, then in 15 years we could drive over the bridge. So this is a guess, educated guess.
Okay. Okay, good. Margus, does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, I think here is a difference between private projects and public infrastructure projects. So I don't have any experience how long this kind of infrastructure projects are planned, but concerning financing, my experience is telling me that big banks normally don't want to start serious discussions, let's say more than 2 years before the money is needed, because it's just waste of time and resources. So and another limiting thing is this kind of planning, spatial planning process. And in Estonia, if the project involves more than one county, and in this bridge case it is so. So the only tool what we have this state special spatial planning process, and it's very complex process which takes at least 4 to 5 years if there is not too many court cases, and for sure there will be court cases. So very often this kind of the length of this spatial planning process is limiting at least private projects. And perhaps also Estonian government could consider that maybe introduce some other planning procedure which can carried out with a shorter time frame.
Yeah, and in the case of the forest project, like although the kind of state level special planning was done, it didn't involve that much the local party. So that was like a maybe structural problem of the planning system, or would you say?
No, actually, in this kind of spatial planning process, you need very, how to say, good ability to carry out the planning process, and also you need resources to do it. So personally, I believe that only the government has to do. So the state special spatial planning is kind of right way to do it if it should be done or lead by the government. Alternative is that there should be maybe some kind of planning procedure which is lead by the investor or interested party. It should have the same qualities, but it could have a different structure inside.
Okay, thank you. There was one question that I think Christian you almost answered, like would local pension fund be willing to invest into a project like this? But that was already the case. Like you said, it's reasonable. But there is also one question, like coming pension reform in Estonia, and there is a correction as well, which is right. Like the question was that does it increase the appetite? And actually it was corrected that probably it doesn't, right? So because the uncertainty increases, or is it so?
Yeah, it's actually a wider topic in the context of this discussion as well. That if I start again from a more general sort of level, then perhaps that kind of infrastructure investments and also the financing deals, there's a very high probability that their duration is longer than the duration of the existing government or the duration of a number of election cycles. So what I believe is important, for example, in terms of that kind of landmark projects, I think for investors it would be a lot more difficult to get engaged if in the parliament, let's say, there is a one vote majority for that kind of a project, and you are running a risk that during the next elections, sort of the powers in the parliament are reversed, and then those who had one vote less will have now 3 votes more, and they are trying to turn it around. So sort of building a strong political consensus for that kind of long-term projects, I think is very, very important, increasing the visibility. And this actually concerns also the existing proposals for the sort of changes in the pension legislation. That something which was supposed to last for at least a few generations is now suddenly being discussed to be changed very dramatically. And I think from the infrastructure perspective or financing perspective, one thing what changes dramatically is the potential uncertainty regarding pension fund liabilities. That once it becomes possible to withdraw from pension funds whenever people want to, then the uncertainty regarding the size of the fund becomes totally sort of unclear. And one can only imagine what is the appetite of getting involved to the project where you know that there is a very low probability that you can get out during the next 15 or 20 years, with your liability side being fully liquid. I personally, I do not dare to estimate if this legislation which is proposed, if this is accepted, that how will people react at the beginning. I certainly do not dare to estimate. And I give you a very good sort of, the explanation for that is that, first of all, think that sort of you are being tasked, or an average person in Estonia is being tasked that what are you planning to do with your finances in 1 year's time? How reliable is this answer? sort of in a 1 year's time, a lot can change. Then the other thing is that the answer what people give today in the environment where unemployment is 5, I think, and decreasing, wage growth is 8, and equity markets have been booming for the 10 years, can be very different how people behave in an environment where maybe suddenly unemployment rate is 8 and increasing, wage growth is 2, decreasing, and equity markets have just collapsed 30%. So sort of, I do not dare to estimate that. But once the first dust has been settled, then I think that the existing second pillar funds and third pillar funds can be looked sort of more or less in a similar way. And one compare how much currently those voluntary third pillar funds, how much do they get engaged into that kind of long-term projects. And the rough difference as a percentage of the fund size is exactly sort of double. So that second pillar funds currently have 2 times more as a percent of the portfolios, that kind of illiquid long-term investments than the third pillar funds. So sort of this maybe gives you some sort of insight what potentially to expect from that outcome.
Yeah, so in a way, if like a big goal for us to be attractive to private sector parties would be to kind of lower the uncertainties, so we just are increasing that a bit, right?
Definitely, I think sort of definitely the question arises that sort of regarding the projects which are supposed to last more than 1 election cycle, that how credible that kind of projects are, and then how credible that kind of political commitments are into that kind of projects. And the pension system is one part of that kind of one example of that project.
So if we continue like this, we will have infrastructure investments with 3-year horizon, like painting houses and stuff like that.
Yes.
So, but there is a question to Martin. Why and how would you consider the procurement law would have been amended?
The procurement law amendment, I sort of answered the question, but the point is that currently, for example, Estonian Road Administration, if we would be a leading partner from the state side, we cannot enter into this type of agreement which takes long-term financial obligations to the state. But this is I think this needs to have a sort of a legal study what exactly and how it needs to be changed to enable actually the PPP agreements to be signed on the public side. Currently, there is an issue in the legal environment.
Okay. So there is a question also about how important are ESG criteria investing into infrastructure projects. Viljus, is this something you would like to tackle?
Well, maybe very briefly. I'm not an environmental expert, but ESG is very important to us. Whether it's to full extent, in a way, that's still question mark. We are currently discussing in the bank, actually, whether we should take into account all those criteria when we finance projects. It's not an easy answer, in a way. So, but environmental issues, yes, it is very important. ESG, let's say we need a bit more time to answer to that question. So, but yes.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience who wants to just ask it? If not at the moment, then I have a question about, we discussed that briefly, but from your point of view, maybe every one of you can answer, is that, let's say you have unlimited powers, you could change one thing to make this happen. What would that be? Who wants to go first?
I can start.
Please do.
And I think I briefly touched upon it already. That I personally I'm afraid that the perception that sort of public commitments which extend more than one election cycle will hold in Estonia, that this perception is slowly changing. Not maybe radically, but at least slowly. And sort of my expectation really is that if that kind of landmark projects are being done, then there is a very strong political buy-in into that kind of projects. Otherwise, it is much more difficult to carry them out and to get good and cheap financing for those.
Okay, Viljus, it's harder for you looking from outside. What would you change? But
Yeah, being from outside, yeah, it's really difficult to answer to that question. Well, I would say you need political support for the project, and then you need experience, let's say, to develop kind of experience to make those projects happen in a way. So that's a message.
okay, Margus?
Yeah, as a private investor, I'm always thinking that there's big difference how to understand and how to evaluate the time. And when we were talking here, that the one obstacle is to change the procurement law. Then my suggestion is that why Minister of Finance or Prime Minister couldn't sign the contract from public side instead of spending many years for auditing and developing new laws.
Very practical view. And Martin, you, what would you change?
I think I'm agreeing on that part that there needs to be a strong consensus, because preparation of large infrastructure projects take time, and the direction has to be similar over the time. Otherwise, we can spend a lot of time and resources on the things that will never happen. So this strong consensus and direction would be the thing that I would change.
Okay, thank you. So, and I think that's a good place to wrap it up, this panel. Thank you very much for joining. I gained some interesting insights into this process. Hopefully you as well. And my third hope is that this will happen. So thank you all.